Welcome. So we're going live. So we're here in my home in Vancouver. Just adjusting everything. So this is Seer and Higher Self guidance. So there will be a description in the underneath for YouTube. And yeah, so it sounds like the sound is good. I do have some construction happening because of course it happens at 11:11 on Tuesday. It's quiet the rest of the time. So that's like what we call like the archon interference. So, and it's, you know, if it wasn't such a big deal of what we're doing kind of in this moment, in this channel, we're kind of connecting to source consciousness. And then we're asking questions about, you know, activations, the how to maintain your consciousness and your stability at 5D, but also in your body, right? So we want to be embodied 5D consciousness. And in 5D consciousness, there's no hierarchy. And 3D is all about hierarchy, especially fear, right? That's the main one is fear, right? Terrify the people. And then if you can't terrify them, then you're going to guilt them. That's the most important too. So we got to guilt the people. And then shame, fear. Well, fear is the first one. So guilt probably would be the second primary, and then shame, and then anger, sadness, and then just anxiety, this generalized anxiety of fear. So because that's what really came up on the live. Oh, this is Thursday's live. Okay, so Thursday at 7:30 a.m. Pacific time. So what came through the chat on Tuesday's live is fear. And so a couple people asked, can you do a decree on fear? And so I really that kind of like went through my through my consciousness, right? Through the heart, through the consciousness, and then kind of floated around. And so so how does that land? Like, what does that mean? And the thing is the decree removes all the interference. Some people would call it entities, but then if you say entities, then it feels like there's these beings, flying around and they're like attaching to you, where it's more intricate than that. It's actually, the ego sounds like your voice. The conscious mind sounds like your voice. And that's why it's so tricky. And that's why awakening on 3D Earth is, essentially the word that's coming through is a miracle, because you have to see that it is your own, it's something inside of you. And the decree highlights what's inside of you. Maybe installations is a strong word, but that's kind of what they look like. Like one client saw that there was like a metal cage on her solar plexus. And then the other time it was like a metal cage on her womb. So just releasing as we're acknowledging this out in the public space. So they're they they put these ley lines or overlays of interference through you, but through your system. And so, but what is it doing, right? It's blocking your senses. It's blocking your heart. And so they know once you connect with your heart, you connect to your inner compass, and then you get the messages of your inner compass, and then your whole body then becomes alive because it becomes conscious, because the body is consciousness embodied. The body is consciousness embodied, not what we've been told. We've been told the body's a hassle, and oh, why can't I be like a light worker back in the ethereal without a body, right? But the body is consciousness. And that's why so much, think about how much happens to the body. Look at what they do to babies. The instant the babies are born, they draw blood from the babies, they put vaccines in the babies, like they do interventions immediately into the new babies, right? So they're doing interventions in the body right away. Like the baby's barely alive, and they're already putting interventions, saying that it's, for safety or whatever. I don't know what they say, but they're already doing interventions to the body. And so if the body was so nothing, then it would be kind of ignored. But it's not ignored. There's interventions in the body right from the moment that we're born in a 3D body. And so because the body will actually tell us what is interfering with us, what is in the way, and then what needs to be removed. It like highlights everything. It's like something is in my body, something is interfering, something is bothering me, right? That is what the body is like the best detective. And then, of course, you go through the heart, and then you go into the inner body, and then you connect to the heart, and then you connect to the inner pillar of consciousness, which is God, source, divine presence, consciousness. And so that's what they're blocking. They don't, because if we connect with our own hearts, our own source consciousness through our hearts, embodied in our body where our compass is active, then how can they interfere with that? Because that's 5D. That is 5D awakened, embodied is 5D consciousness, and they cannot go past 4D. So that's why they've always looked so smart, oh, look at all the technology and all the things they're doing, all the genetic experiments. And then, they're bringing it to 3D. But if we're awakening to 5D on Earth, then we're superseding basically, the controllers, or they're also called the architects, or they're also called the Anunnaki. So we're superseding the controllers and the controllers of the material plane. So, and I don't even, before I was like, oh, well, they do such evil things, but they do things in terms of their state of consciousness. Like their consciousness is 1%. Like they call themselves the 1%ers. They're saying, oh, I'm a billionaire, I'm a 1%er. But they're literally telling us they have 1% consciousness. They're like parasites. They're actually less than parasites. Maybe parasites have, I don't know, more consciousness, because 1% is nothing. So basically they need, loosh, they call it. They need our energy. And I've seen that they need 80% of us to agree to give our energy. And so they do things to frighten us. One thing I was shown, and I've said this before, it's like, how cows, they want cows to go in a certain direction. They use like a metal prod, like they electrocute them so that they go into like a formation. And that's kind of what the installations are. The installations are to kind of prod us, with fear. Like when I was awakening and stabilizing my 5D consciousness, there would be this super loud knock at my door at like 3 or whatever, 2 a.m. Boom, 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 boom. And, I'd wake up totally afraid and startled, and, And that's when I do all of the things with, the spritzing of the essential oils like mint or rosemary in the corners and the salt. And it's like it's ancient from 2000 years ago. The Gnostics did it, the Essenes did it, the Cathars with Mary Magdalene did it. They secured the vibration and frequency in their space so that they could rest their nervous system, they could rest their lymphatic system. And so they weren't, they didn't have to be like on guard while they're asleep, because as soon as you're asleep, you lose one of your main um, protectors, which is your body's consciousness, eyes open, feeling, hearing, seeing, sensing. And, that's why they do so much. Like if you go outside in Vancouver, there's so many condos being built. It's 24/7 construction, constant drilling and and metal cutting into metal, like that scraping metal sound. And that's like constant. That's that they like I call them the screechers. I have a lot of names for them, but they love that screeching sound, and it just, torments the poor like babies and toddlers, but they love the screeching, the screeching sound. And, you know, but basically you maintain your consciousness, your 5D consciousness, and then they have no access to you. But it's a 5D consciousness because everybody thinks, okay, 5D consciousness, I go out of my body and I go off planet. No, it's in this 3D body. 5D consciousness is in this 3D body. 5D consciousness embodied. Right? So there's an awakening for your consciousness, but there's also embodying 5D in your body. And that's when we have to remove these overlays and the interference. And that's where the decree came in, where it's like, well, how do you like remove these once and for all? Well, first we have to see it in the moment that it's happening. Like the first time when I had that big bang bang on my door, I was like, terrified, my nervous system is like shaking. And then by the third time it happened, I was like, I called in, the team, God, source, divine presence, protect me now. I call in Yeshua, I call in Miriam, Mother Mary, Yeshua, Jesus, and that in the crucifixion timeline, call in Archangel Michael of unconditional love. So these are guides that I work with, that have come forward to me that, I trust. So as soon as you call them, they come in fast. If they come in slow and they come in with a negotiation, that is a false guide. False guides come in like the ego, they ramble, right? They have like a later, like, oh, you're not going to get it in this life, maybe later, the next life, that they're famous for the next life, the redo, like, oh, you can't clear it in this life, and that's what tipped me off in quantum hypnosis is like, I'd listen to the answers and I would say like, no, that's not true. So then I was like, who's speaking? That's not the higher self. The higher self knows the present moment is the only moment. Present moment is the only consciousness, right? But the ego, the the architects, the controllers, it's, their trick is to stay stuck in a loop, like redo, 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 and then feel bad. Oh, you did this, and so your karma needs to get paid. It's like we don't actually look at our own karma and our lessons. Like that is with our higher self. So it's false. So they always put out these like false, so it's not just in the medical community, it's in the spiritual community. The spiritual community started with like, go out of your body, transcend. You're trapped in this 3D body. You're like a low life, you know? And the body, the nervous system, the cells, like Eckhart Tolle said to me, so in 1997 to 2000, when we meditated one-on-one, or I meditated with him one-on-one, so he's the teacher, and he said, we could do a PhD on one cell and we would never run out of PhDs. That is how genius one cell in our body is. So the decree removes the cellular interference. So it's a real respect for our bodies and our consciousness. We're told, oh, we're lowly because we're in a body. It's not true. Like, our guides of unconditional love are patient, and they are so loving, and they're so understanding about how complex and how difficult awakening in 3D is, and getting through the muck. Like, they know, you know, they know. Whew, heated there. Yeah, so we just really respect the body, because the body is the compass, and it will tell us when something is interfering, when something is wrong. All right, let's take a look at the chat. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. Okay, so hi Helen, thank you for being here. And then Sneeja's here. Good morning, Elaine, and everyone else here. ABD watching. Yeah. Thank you. Heart, heart. I'll send you guys some hearts for being here. Thank you, and joining the chat. And so if you feel like, saying, who you are and where you're from, you can always do that in the chat. There's a few more people. I never, let's see. So Sinija, 1973, she, her. Okay. My sleep is better since claiming my space and decrees. Thank you, Sanija, for saying that. It's true. Like, everything that I've kind of sorted out in the decrees, it has been since 1990. And I always make the worst mistakes. My dad used to say that, that I would, he was an empath. So he was a not bad dad, but the he was kind of surrounded by the dark triad. But a lot of what I've done is through trial and error, and then I reflect back and I think, okay, well, if I that would actually have cleared this. So I don't know if you can hear it, but there's kind of pounding on the roof above me. But I'm committed, right? We're committed here in awakening and stabilizing 5D, and 5D in the body, no matter what, right? Because it's like, if we're 5D is no hierarchy, so we are doing this together, right? So I just happen to be the one holding the meeting or the platform, right? But we're here together, and consciousness is one, right? Whew. Yeah, take a deep breath. Yeah, so sleep. So Sunija says, my sleep is better since claiming my space and the decree. So Sunija and Helen, I think you both have done all the decrees up until now. So the first decree was the welcome. The second one is naming your space. And then Sunija, we did that together in one of the YouTube lives. And then Sunija found she had a better name, or a name that came through organically for her, because sometimes when you ask your higher self to name your space, you get kind of like performance anxiety. So you think, oh, what's my higher self going to say? And actually, I had somebody this week that actually did the same. They named their space, and then they renamed it. As soon as they started spritzing and salting the corners, then a new name, and it became crystal clear. So it wasn't like they didn't doubt it. It came through crystal clear, and then they renamed it. And it was interesting because the person said that when they got a new car, they got a used car, and it has about 200,000 kilometers on it. And so they put like a little medallion that had Archangel Michael and Archangel Raphael, and those are two archangels that she works with and connects with. And so she got them and she put them on the dashboard of her car. And every time she gets in her car, she's like, thank you, Archangel Michael, thank you, Archangel Raphael, for protecting my car. And she showed me her car and she got T-boned, and the other car almost was totaled. And there's barely a scrape, and this isn't magical. Like, this is like, she's saying this happened to her. And then I saw the actual vehicle. And what she saw in her mind's eye and her consciousness was Archangel Michael and Archangel Raphael holding these pillows in between the two cars. That's what she said. That's what flashed through really quickly. Right? So it's like we can name our cars. We can name our workspace. It can be the same name, but she was essentially, she didn't name her car, but she named it, in protection of Archangel Michael and Archangel Raphael. And it would, and so it was, she was already doing this, but then we just refined it by her naming it. So a lot of times you're already, even the things in the decree you've already heard before, or you already know. And then you're kind of getting reminded, or we're refining it so that it becomes second nature. Like, as soon as I wake up, I spritz and salt the corners and claim all the corners in Source's name. And I have a big window right here, a balcony window, and I claim it and I touch it and I claim it in Source's name. And the mirrors. So the mirrors and the doors are, thought of as like portals. And, Vancouver is like the city of glass. Like, all the high rises are glass. So it's all portals. Like, I don't know really. I'll be curious to see like the depths of the darkness of Vancouver, because we have, it's a beautiful city, but we have like the highest rate of drug overdoses and homelessness. So I remember going to San Francisco in like 2003 and seeing like how many homeless old people, like elderly people, were on the street homeless. I was shocked. But Vancouver looks like that now. There's so many elderly people that are homeless. So, and then you just see there's so much, like the drugs are so mixed with stuff. So people don't even know, what's in it. Like, even the children, the children are having accidental overdoses because they're vaping, and the vaping, whatever is in the vaping has different, drugs in it. So yeah, that's kind of, but the fast track, because one of my friends said to me, but what do we do, but the fast track really is stabilizing your 5D consciousness, because as soon as you stay in that 5D, I'm just going to adjust this a bit. As soon as we stabilize our 5D consciousness, then we're helping at least 750,000 people. So as soon as you awaken embodied, you actually help the most amount of people, which is amazing, right? So let's take a look at the chat again. So thanks, Sunija, for saying that about your sleep, because that is where the attacks happen the most. I would say that most of my life, I barely slept. And I even had a job that I worked 90 hours in film for 20 years because I was like, I didn't sleep anyways, you know? So, I mean, I might as well have been working. It didn't, actually bother me because I was not a good sleeper. So yeah, 100, yeah, I'm getting 100%. Yeah, totally. And I'll send some hearts back. So, okay, so Cindy just says, I have Palm 91, what? A PSALM? PSLAM 91 in my car. Oh, Psalm 91. Okay, I can't tell you how many times I could have lost my life in it. Exactly. And actually, as light workers, it's amazing that we're alive. Because if you look back in your life at how many, you know, moments of death could have happened, it's unbelievable. Like in one time I was hit, and I was like 23, and so he had like a big Ford truck, and it was dark and rainy, and I guess he was drunk. I guess he got charged. He was a drunk driver. And then anyways, he kind of smashed through me like I was invisible. And I remember the car just started spinning, and I was heading straight for the pole, and I was like, no, not the pole. And then, not that I'm saying I'm supernatural or anything, like, I'm not Joe Dispenza, I'm supernatural, but that consciousness of that no. And then the witness, and his last name was White, and he had his little boy, and the whole passenger side was crumpled in, and he put his hand through the broken glass, and he said, like, I want to be your witness. I saw everything. You were heading for that pole, and your car stopped on a dime, and that's not possible. And then the insurance, we have our insurance is by the government, and they lost his witness statement 7 times because he was such a good witness. But anyways, they had to, they had to pay a lot for that accident. But he was amazing, and his last name was White. So yeah, thank you to him. Right? There's so many moments where we've had so many life and death moments here in 3D Earth, because they're at 4D, their job is to get us off the planet as fast as possible, because it doesn't take very many of us in awakening our 5D consciousness to completely flip everything that they've worked on for 2000 and more years. Like, we're basically unraveling. They plan so far ahead, and but they have no creativity. So they just do the same thing over and over and over again, you know? So anyways, but and then we come here, and then they tell us, we're garbage, we're too sensitive, we don't know what we're talking about, we're paranoid. And it's like, I'm not paranoid. I'm not afraid to see things as they are. Like, it doesn't bother me. Like, it used to bother me when I was a kid. When I was a kid, if I saw people that looked like reptilians, it really bothered me. Like, I saw my older brother, he's a year older than me. And I looked at him, and I was 5 and he was 6, and I was like, you're a lizard. And he was like, take it back. And I was like, no, you're a lizard. Like, I could see it. And I wasn't judging him, but I was like blown away, you know? So but I didn't know what I was seeing. Now I understand, just a crow just kind of startled me because it just flew by the mirror. So it's like naming those things, because a lot of people that are seers or empath sensitives, they see things when they're children and teens and even young adults, and they don't understand, and then they get frightened, and then they shut down their senses because they're frightened because it's shocking, you know but he's still a lizard. He's still a reptilian. He hasn't changed. I used to think, oh, you can just pour love into them. They want love, and they want to kill you. They want to eat you alive. They want to destroy you. They hope you destroy yourself. right? They are committed to lying, cheating, and stealing because that is the lowest frequency. And they want you constantly afraid. They want, basically to be stepping on you, so that you're like the garbage that they step on, but they need your energy. They need to siphon your energy. And the decree ends that so that you're not depleted and that no one is siphoning your energy. Because your energy is gold. Your energy is the most valuable thing that they are after is our energy and trying to convince you to remove yourself off the planet. But when we choose our exit point is up to us. Like they cannot decide when it's, like Sinija with her car. They cannot decide when they can kind of put people in situations and put you in precarious situations, but your pillar of consciousness, they cannot interfere with that pillar of consciousness. And when you say no, and you say, no, you do not have my consent, it is like a lightning bolt, right? And then claiming, I am sovereign, I am free. It is a lightning bolt on 3D Earth, and 4D feels it, you know? Oh, and Sunny just saying, yeah, and suicide is high in Vancouver. Yeah, I volunteered for the crisis line in 2000, and then I volunteered again in 2023. And the difference, like the suicide lines, like they're basically just gathering now in 2023, they just gather information. So all the phone calls, so you're in distress. So they're filming you, they're recording the conversation. We have to write like notes to see if like who wants like right now they're really promoting MAID, which is medically assisted suicide. And they're doing this under the umbrella of mental health. And they're saying under mental health that children that are 16 years old and maybe younger with their doctor can decide if they want to end their life through MAID. And you can be like, have anxiety and be, depressed. And it's like, yeah, well, how about telling the children why they're so distressed, why they're so overwhelmed, like who they're surrounded by. How about protecting the children? Whoa, instead of like, promoting mental health, and the other thing they're promoting now in schools that just is rolling out through mental health is they're saying they want to teach kids how to take cocaine safely, right? So then they have these pamphlets in school, and mental health is coming to the schools, and their plastic straws are illegal. You can't actually, if you go to a store, you have to have like a bamboo straw or a paper straw, but you cannot have a plastic straw. They are banned in Canada. So the stores also have to, these mom and pop shops, they have to have, the more expensive bamboo and, whatever. So there's no plastic, but apparently they're showing kids, Mental Health Canada is showing kids, and they're showing a pamphlet, and they're giving them all these different color straws, and they're showing them how they can snort Coke up their nose safely. It's madness, right? And they're introducing MAID to children. If you're depressed and you're having a hard time and you're being bullied, well, end your life, and then they take all the organs, right? While you're alive, while the children are alive, they take all the organs because they're like, oh, we can transplant the brain and the eyes and the heart and but are they wanting the reptilian, the reptilian brains and the reptilian organs? No, right? They want the light workers. They want the empath sensitives. Whoa, whoa, there was just a huge bang. just above me. Somebody, they just banged. So anyways, they're having a bit of a fit. I guess what I'm saying is, but it's in the news. Like I'm not, I'm saying it because this is actually getting rolled out in Canada. And it gets rolled out first in Ontario because Ontario has a higher population than BC. Um, but they need the light workers, they need the empaths. That's who they're targeting, you know? So the sensitives, because we're with our consciousness connected to source, we actually can change things, we can alter things on 3D Earth, which is it's already happening. The shift is already happening. So it's just releasing. But that was surprising. That was like what it sounded like was this heavy machine just slammed on right above me, like literally right above, because there's nobody above me, so they're working on the roof. So yeah, but anyways, this is stuff that we need to talk about because it's happening. And then Sunija says, yeah, people are living in their vehicles more and more, and not being able to afford housing. Yeah, and that is true in Vancouver. You know, they're the taxes are so high. So in Canada, we pay 80% of our income goes to tax. So yeah. Um, and then Sunija says, made is genocide in gloves. Yeah, exactly. And that's, in 2000, when I would talk to people, when people would call the crisis line, the crisis suicide line, we would just, be empathic, reflect back. And, there was, little bit of notes, but not much. Now it's like everything is documented. There's no privacy. There's, before you used to have like patient doctor privacy. There's no privacy. So, and there's an agenda, like my higher self was like, it actually would be better if no one worked at the crisis line. You're working, you're volunteering. Like I looked, when I was volunteering in 2023 and I was working the phones, and I was like on the floor and there was about 8 other people and I was the only one that was a volunteer, right? Because they all are trying to use it to, get their PhDs or to get their masters, so they're going to the crisis line because they say, well, they give you a really good, reference. But it's, you know, the main question is they wanted to see statistically how many people would choose MAID if they're feeling suicidal or depressed or stuck or in pain, chronic pain. And and then once they got the data, that they see a certain amount of the collective is asking for it, then it was, within 6 months, then MAID was rolled out, and now it's rolled out very quickly to also include children. It's madness, total madness. It's total madness. It's actually totally disgusting. How about helping the children so they're not afraid, so they're not being constantly frightened, targeted. They can't go outside because, they're going to be kidnapped or put in sex trafficking. Like, it's ridiculous. Like they just caught the Disney cruise ship or whatever, But that's what they say all the time. And I hear this is that no one gets away with anything. So it seems like a lot, but it is documented. Like there is a consciousness, a divine consciousness. It's not childlike thinking. And then Sunija said, so just looking at the chat, Sunija said, yes, during MAID, the person is still alive. They're paralyzed and loved ones think they're dead. But they harvest the organs and they have to be alive. Yeah, exactly. They have to harvest the organs. And of course, they want the children's organs. So, I mean, that's what, the Greys have been famous for, right? Is kind of like the abductions to collect genetic information, basically to extract something, something from you. All right, let's have some water. Mm. Helen says, wow. Yeah, it's like, you know, but it's not a secret. Like this is actually like in the news. So it's, but it's not like it's not like famous singers, they or whatever, a Hollywood famous, but but they have to, I don't know. It's We'll do some work to kind of calm the nervous system because the information is so agitating and we don't want to go in that low vibration of fear. It's more just naming it so that it's not a secret, basically. We're naming it to bring it out into consciousness. So let's do a little grounding, because we're bringing this not to activate the pain body or to activate hopelessness, but we're doing it to bring it basically to consciousness, to the light, to source consciousness. But our nervous systems, they need to know that, like children, they need to know that they're going to be okay, that they're safe, that, you're there witnessing with them. You're always going to take care of them. You're always going to be with them. That's kind of what our nervous system needs, like you're going to be okay and that you're safe. So we're just going to ground. Um, and then Helen put a comment in. She said, I didn't know about MAID. I feel ill. Yeah, there was this guy in the news recently that he went to the hospital, and then if it's kind of interesting actually, like they say in Europe, like they used to avoid doctors in the hospital like the plague. And I would hear from my relatives in Europe, they would say that you need to have a witness at the hospital so that nothing happens to you. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. Like, what would happen to you in a hospital? And what this guy said is they thought that he was going to die and he didn't have any family, he didn't have a partner, he didn't have anybody. He was like a solo guy. And he said, and they took them to this different part in the hospital. And then he was sedated, but he woke up. And and then he realized, they were actually going to do that. They were going to harvest his organs. So it those they're not urban myths. And in Canada, they kind of like, they put it out there. So, but if you don't have people around you and you only need one, that will advocate for you, that will care for you, that will protect you, like that's all we need, and that's what we're creating together. We're creating this frequency of, you're not alone, like we're together. So we're going to bring in, just because the topics have been, you know but that's 3D. 3D is, they need 80% of our energy for Loosh. And not just anybody. They don't need the reptilians, because of course the reptilians are empty. They're made. They're the just releasing. It's releasing. It's releasing, releasing out of the solar plexus. So what's coming through is, when they banged on on the roof above me when I was at a certain part when we were talking about this, that's basically the temper tantrums that they do. But if you think about it, I'm safe in my room and it's only above me, but there's a ceiling in between us. So they can kind of have a temper tantrum where they make noise. But I've already claimed this YouTube to source. I've already claimed the technology to source. I've already claimed the Zoom to source. So but they're not interfering with my room, right? They can't, they can kind of what I call temper tantrums, you know? So one time I was at a certain, and because they want to scare you to not stabilize your frequency. They want to scare you like, oh, but if you talk about these things, bad things are going to happen. It's dangerous. It's not dangerous. It's what's dangerous is staying at 3D consciousness. What's dangerous is made, medically assisted death. What is dangerous is 4D. 4D is not dangerous to 5D. And none of this is dangerous to, source consciousness. Like, to them, they're like, no one gets away with anything. But for us, maintaining our frequency, that is what is going to create the most temper tantrums. But for me, I'm so committed to being in service to source and consciousness that there's no way, like Sinija was worried in the last live, and it's a good worry to put out there, that she's going to get tricked, but you just keep focusing on your heart, keep focusing on your inner body. So they're drilling now above me. I don't know if you can hear it. Hopefully you can't. But um but we're keeping the space open of consciousness regardless of the horrors of 3D. Like 3D is horrific, right? And I hear that from so many clients, from so many people, and I thought that, like, like 3D is a horror show. It is disgusting. There's so many disgusting things. But if we focus on the disgusting things, then we stay in 3D. Right? Our consciousness drops, and they want our consciousness to drop. But they don't want us to stay embodied at 5D consciousness, because then they have no access. So Cindy just says she can't hear the drilling. Okay, that's great. So hopefully, like, because with my microphone, Zoom, I find, will also like edit out if I cough and stuff. So, so I think that they have like and then that's the thing, is there's also like negative things about AI, and then there's positive things about AI. So in the olden days in film, in the 80s and 90s, you had to be so quiet on set, because it's like somebody could have their phone and it would vibrate, and you could hear it in the transmission on in the movie, and it was filmed, not digital, so it was so expensive. So everybody's like super tense on set because you could hear like a pin drop, and the sound people would glare at you, if you made a noise. So yeah, there's always both, right? But I feel like what I've seen and what I've been told as a seer, right? As consciousness, as a being of consciousness, is that everything everything can be used by source. So that's why naming our technology is so important, and naming our homes, like like this space is claimed in source's name. So just when I said that, the drilling went quiet, like I claim the space in source's name. And so you think, oh, well, it's a coincidence or it's just magical thinking. And it's like, okay, but it happened, right? I said it and the drilling stopped for that moment. So, okay, let's take a look. Let's tune in. Tune in because we don't want to go out of our body. So let's tune into the body. So we're going to go into the inner body through the heart. We'll do this together if you will, if you choose to. So we're going to go into the inner body together and take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out. And you can feel it in your solar plexus where the ribs meet, and then the sacral, which is below. So we'll take another deep breath in and another deep breath out. Good. And then just feel like your feet are planted on the ground, connected to Gaia, which is new earths. So Tara is 5, 6D, but we're going 7, 8, 9D. Connecting to the crystalline grid. And we're just going to invite the vitamins and minerals from the earth, because the earth has all the vitamins and minerals, has all the gold, has all the rubies and the crystals and the diamonds and the precious stones and the precious stones. And we're just going to invite, and our higher self will know what we need. We're just going to invite the vitamins and minerals and the diamonds, the rubies, the crystals to come up through the crystalline grid and connect to ourselves, and then replenish ourselves, and then release from ourselves what isn't for our highest and greatest good. So we're receiving, but we're also releasing. And then Gaia, new earth, will transmute and transform whatever we dislodge out of ourselves for the highest and greatest good, right? So Gaia, Mother Earth, is also a transmuter, a transmitter, a recycler. Like Gaia can recycle. So, and then just checking into the inner body, and then feeling our feet on the ground, our spine balanced and open. And then we're just going to bring source consciousness, God, source, divine presence, consciousness through the golden light of source, through our hearts, through our inner being. And you can kind of feel, like I can feel some activity in my third eye and especially on the left side, the divine feminine, you know. So just we're noticing it, and then we're just gonna release it to source. So any body sensations that you notice, any tension, just release it if you choose, right? It's always free will if you choose, and then just release it to source's golden light. And then open, 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 open. So I always call it like open your wingspan, open your wingspan, open, open, open. Like you're opening to source consciousness. So you're opening, right? So we're respecting our bodies, respecting, Gaia, respecting source consciousness, connecting, staying committed to our hearts and the inner body. Good. And then you can kind of wiggle your toes even to remind yourself to stay grounded, with Gaia. And then again, I feel the tension in the third eye. So, when we talk about kind of things that are happening, that are under the umbrella of loosh, Loosh, the energy, like the grays and the reptilians. The reptilians are there to activate the loosh, to create situations that will bring in more loosh. They're like the administrators. They're like office workers, basically. And then, but remember, like, they're desperate. Like, if you're at heart-based consciousness, 5D, that's 500, and they're at 1 consciousness. Like, that's barely alive, and they know it, and that's why they're so desperate, because they know they're out of time. So anyways, we're just releasing a lot through the hair because it's like a fast track. So you get to see me brush my hair with my hands a lot. So it's like a fast track. And then just stay in your heart space, in your inner body. And then we're just kind of taking a look, like I always take a look and notice, okay, there's still a little bit in the third eye on the left, no, on the right side, sorry, on the right side. And then the solar plexus is activated, but we're setting our boundaries. We're basically saying, you do not have my consent. Inferred consent is not consent. And anything that is not source, I revoke in full. Only source, only the divine, only consciousness mirroring consciousness, source mirroring source, the divine mirroring divine, right? So your own divine inner being, your own source consciousness pillar, then mirrors source. So it's source and source. And then just seeing how that feels in the body. Good. And then just open, 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 but you're opening to your own consciousness, basically, right? You're not opening up to whatever is around town. You're opening to your own consciousness with source. So source consciousness, or you can use the word God or divine presence. And then just connecting with the spine again. So just feeling it's usually there's tension in the low spine. So just feeling there's some tension that we're just releasing in the low spine, and then the top of the head. So we're just gonna bring source consciousness to the top of the head, because that's where a lot of siphoning of energy comes from, the top of the head. So we're just gonna seal it with source's golden light. And then seal the third eye with source's golden light. And then seal the lowest part of the spine in source's golden light. Releasing the neck and the shoulders, they're not bad. Good. And then breathe, and then see how that feels. Much better. Right? Like, we can acknowledge the darkness, but we don't have to live there. We don't have to live in the darkness in order to transmute and transform the darkness. Darkness is, it just needs a light switch. That's what we are. Like, light workers are the light switch, where we go into these dark places and we admit what is happening, not what we're told is happening. We say what is happening, and then we turn on a light switch. That essentially is a light worker. The light of consciousness. Okay, and then Sanija's asking tell us more about the fear decree, and then the X relationship decree. So the X relationship decree is going to come out on Saturday, so in 2 days, so the 16th of May, 2026, and today's date is the 14th of May, 2026. So the fear decree, all the decrees are the fear decree, because fear is the main, well, the word that's coming through is the main weapon of 3D. Fear is the main weapon to keep you and your nervous system, so you're like this, in a state of fear. And that happens in families, in relationships, at work. Like I have people that are, they have like super scary bosses. They have a Draco reptilian boss, you know, the big boss, not their immediate supervisor. Usually the supervisors are like the empaths, and then the boss and like the CEO and the CFO are usually Draco reptilians. So, and then they create a lot of fear to make sure that you're, kind of under control. Their job is to make sure you're under control. And then the empathic supervisor tries to like, because if you get too afraid, then you leave, so they don't want you to leave, but they want you to kind of be in that state of fear, but not to the point of paralysis, right? So that's what they're always kind of dealing with, the fine line, right? So think of all of the decrees as as awakening, highlighting fear, and then the removal of fear, right? Because what if you have a really bad relationship with an ex and you had children, with a Draco reptilian, they're a psychopath, and you're in a domestic violence situation, and you just barely made it out alive, but the children are still entangled. One woman, she lost her custody of her 3 children, and he never wanted the children, but he took all the 3 children, and they were like 6 and under, right? So these horrific things. And so there's nothing more terrifying than somebody taking your children. Yeah, so 100%. So thanks. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing more terrifying to an empath, to a light worker, than somebody taking your children and your small children. There's nothing more horrific, but he went to court and he got a court order. And so, but if you stay in the fear, like you're afraid of this Draco reptilian, you're afraid of this ex, let's just call him the ex-husband, it was a domestic violence, so you barely got out with your, you barely got out alive, but then you also have to keep your children alive, right? So you're managing not just yourself, but also your children. So of course, then, they usually control all the money and the resources, and everything is in their name. So you have nothing in your name, and you don't even have a bank account. And, it just goes on and on and on. But they isolate you so far that you're completely controlled. And I always think, wow, like, I wonder, I know who that person's higher self is. I always think, wow, if you have so much these what I call like the big gun Draco reptilian controllers around you, like, who are you? Like, you're not seeing your power, you're not seeing your consciousness, because of course you're terrified, right? You're in fear, and your children's lives are in, you're afraid for your children. But why why is your life in such a heavy-handed, why is your life around these handlers that are so heavy handed? Like, who are you? Who are you, the woman that escaped this? You have all of this, all these people against you, but you're still alive and you've survived. So who are you? Like, if you've had so much opposition and so many people come after you, so many life and death situations, who are you? Like, who's your higher self? Like, why are they so determined that you stay so afraid that you do not awaken to who you are? Because as soon as you awaken to who you are, they look like clowns. But, in that state, your nervous system, you could be terrified and like shaking, and, just that the X calling you could create like a terror, where your whole body is shaking, your nervous system, and then you're afraid, what are they going to do next? You're like so afraid. But then if you focus on your heart and you focus on consciousness and you focus on, Gaia, on Mother Earth, and you go to the basics, like right now in this moment, I'm safe. Like right now in this moment, we are together and we're safe. And then we amplify that together. And then you feel it in your body. You feel what safety feels like. You feel what security feels like. And then you name that person in the decree, and you name what you revoke. And then you name what you reclaim. I reclaim my freedom. I reclaim my innocence. I reclaim my nervous system. I reclaim my safety. I reclaim my children's safety, right? Because there are children we can claim for them. We can advocate for them. And so then you're also, you have to deal with the 3D things that are happening. Maybe you have to deal with courts, or you have to deal with, you're in a safe house, but you're also doing work energetically, you're not ignoring the 3D, but you're doing the energetic excavation, since they're doing all the drilling above me, they're like basically excavating above me, like they're roofing, so they're going into the ceiling. they're going into the ceiling, basically the layers of the ceiling. So at least energetically in your system, you're releasing it, you're signing it with your own name, and you're burning it, which is transmutation, which is a very ancient ritual of release. And so then source can interfere because you've released it to source, to the divine, to God, to source, to the divine. Because by ourselves, of course, we don't have the solution for MAID, but by ourselves, we don't have the solution for domestic violence. But in terms of energetic frequency, as light workers, we actually have a lot of power and energetic frequency. And frequency always wins, right? The higher, and it is in terms of like a higher frequency, like 500 is 5D is a higher frequency than 1D, than one. So, than 100. So frequency, vibration always wins. And so if we can maintain even through our fear, but we don't stay, and we don't stay in fear. We may have moments of fear or many moments in fear, but then we get back to our base heart, base frequency. And then we can help each other do that. And basically that is the decree ejecting fear, because you're naming what you're afraid of. You're revoking it, and then you're reclaiming what you want. I want my safety. I want my children's safety. I want my money, because usually if you're in a domestic violence situation, they took all the money. They took the car, they took the house, so I reclaim my car. I reclaim my house. And then they make you believe that you're so worthless, you know? If you were so worthless, why did they do so much to keep you in the relationship? If you're so garbage, if you're garbage, why did they work so hard to keep you in the relationship if you're so nothing? It's your energy, it's your frequency. And so the decree ejects people, energies that are not heart-based out of your frequency so that so your nervous system, can start to calm down, and as soon as your nervous system calms down, and then you're staying connected with your heart, you're staying connected with Mother Earth, you're connected to Source, already that's a spiritual awakening. And you are terrified at the same time. Like that, and you don't have any answers because all you know is that you're in a safe house. Your children have been taken away with the dark triad, so the psychopath, sociopath, narcissist, which are also the Draco reptilians and the reptilians. So they've been taken away. And then all you have is then your focus on your frequency and focus on ejecting out what you are afraid of, like what is controlling you. And we can start doing that energetically. Like this is energy work, and we can really put our foot down. Like I am sovereign, I am free, and I eject this. Like there was somebody that popped in, that they were like a stalker, from, and this has been going on for like 10 years, and they kind of popped up a couple days ago. And so I was like, I noticed how my body felt. So normally I would have felt more kind of fear, but I didn't feel that, but I felt a tremor. And I thought, oh, I wonder if I have to do another decree, because I've already done 2 decrees to eject them. And they kind of came with a group. And then I was like, no, my decree stands. Like, no. And I was like, my decree stands. And I literally could feel it in my solar plexus. Right? So we can really put our foot down. It's like when this recursion happens, like I did the practical things, of course, to keep myself safe. But then I was like, no, my decree stands. And then that was it. And like, whatever. Because we can't control other people, but we can control our frequency. We can name and claim our frequency. And it is ejecting fear. Like all the decrees eject fear. Because fear is the food of 4D. They need us to be in fear 24/7. And they need to loosh 80% of that fear out of our bodies. Just releasing. So, okay, so let's look at the chat again. Okay, so, yeah, so then the X decree is really important, but even if somebody's like innocuous, like say they're, from childhood and you haven't really thought about them much, but say they pop in, on your socials, or they kind of pop in once in a while. But that can also be a way of like leaking your energy because it's pulling you to another time space, and it could also, pull you into something negative or positive, but they're not in your life now. So if they're not in your life now, then like why is this popping up to like, because our energy is always trying to be used to move us to another time space where there's only the present moment and the inner presence. So let's look at the chat. Okay, so how come looking at the chat, so Sunija is asking, so how come we end up incarnating with archons, and what's the purpose? Is it because we get tricked in the astral? Okay, so let's answer. Those are really good questions, Sinija. And thank you, Helen and Sinija, for the there's like a big bang just in this question. Like literally, it sounds like somebody, is like drop something really heavy, just like above my head. So let's read that question again, because obviously it hit a mark. So how come we end up incarnating with archons, and what's the purpose? Okay, so there's like levels of that answer. So how come the material plane was created? So because 3D is very different than the other states of consciousness, so like 11D or 12D, or like the seraphim, which are like the angelic collective, or like 25D, right? So it's like, 3D is very different. 3D is hierarchy, 3D is, basically loosh. So for 40s. And so how come it was created? So the story of the Gnostics, so the Gnostic teachings, so it's not religion, was that there is a divine pairing. So there is the divine feminine and then the divine masculine. So the divine feminine was called Sophia. And then Sophia heard kind of like the cries of 3D, the children, the loosh, the madness. And so she wanted to help. So she left, kind of, source consciousness. She left source consciousness and descended into matter without her divine counterpart, the divine masculine. So she's the divine feminine, and she descended into matter without her divine counterpart. And then she got basically stuck. So she got, she heard the cries of 3D, heard the cries of the children, and then she got stuck. And, they said it was like based on her impulsive act. So they kind of removed Sophia out of the religious texts, but then they found them, I think it was like 1945, and they had been buried in Egypt, and I think they're called the Nag Hammadi texts. And then they found them in the sand. Well, a regular guy actually, he found them. And so it was basically her descent, and then her descent was in and descended her into matter, so 3D. So, and then basically then Sophia had to awaken, because 3D is so dense, she had to awaken where is she and how to awaken out of the 3D density. And then basically Sophia, and then the divine counterpart is Christ. So it's Christ Sophia, so Christ consciousness, not like Jesus, crucified Jesus, that the religion, that the crucifix timeline created, but the divine pairing of consciousness. So the divine pairing of consciousness is the divine masculine, and divine feminine has nothing to do with gender or sex. It's a balance of a pair. It's a pair. And then they made it, in 3D matter, they made it so confusing that you can't tell what's up or down, or what's source and what's not source. Is that confusing? So it was basically her descent into matter was to help, but because she, and then at first it was, kind of taught like it was like a carelessness of the divine feminine. She fell into matter without the divine counterpart of the masculine. But really it was for her to help because she heard the cries. But it was to bring light into 3D density, to bring consciousness into 3D density. And then the rulers of 3D are the archons. So that's the Gnostic name. But in modern times, it's the Draco-Reptilians and the reptilians. So it's they're the same entities, or same whatever frequency, very low. They're like the administrators for the 4D. And they're basically there to help keep you at that low base of fear and confusion. And then so Sanija's next question was, um, is it because we get tricked in the astral? And yeah, that is it. So that was the Dolores Cannon's teaching and other spiritual teachers, where you die and then there's a white light and follow the white light and the white and then there's going to be guides that are going to come forward, and then they're going to ask you, what's your purpose and what are the lessons of this life, and oh, don't you want to reincarnate to kind of improve all the things you did wrong, right? So that's the trick. That's the trick in the astral. Um, and then you can be kind of trapped in 3D for hundreds of years, you know. But once you awaken and once you see it, it all then becomes irrelevant, because once you awaken to who you are, then you start awakening your DNA, going, 12-strand DNA, and you're removing the interference, which then, organically your diamond body will activate your original blueprint. And then the divine pairing of the divine masculine and the divine feminine activates inside of you. So then you have that balance, right? So especially important for the divine feminine, because if they have the divine masculine activated inside of them, then they can become assertive and really crystal clear. So, and then basically that is the awakening of out of 3D material, out of the 3D material plane. And Sophia basically did it for us first, so that she basically set a template of how to awaken out of 3D density. And the Gnostics documented it. And then, of course, because it was documented how to awaken out of 3D, it was buried, but the documents were found there. I think it was 1945 in the Egyptian desert they were found. So, and they basically were giving us the clues, but then that's when we learned, yeah, but they always, the Essenes claimed their spaces, they claimed their space in Source's name. They created a frequency in their homes. Because the archons cannot go anywhere near 5D. They basically like evaporate because it's too high of a frequency. The heart is too high of a frequency. And then Sunija asked, yes, and the archons are after our free will. Yeah, they want to trick us to basically sign these contracts to give these funny hand singles. They have the eye and you always have to show, who you, and I had another big bang. You have to show that you're in service to them, right? That you're, the 4D, they think of themselves as God, so they need you to constantly be declaring your devotion to them, and saying to the public, like, what team are you on, basically. And so they want you to, but everything can be revoked, and the decree revokes everything. It revokes everything except for your original design, your original consciousness, your consciousness with source. So all these games that they play in 3D, they have that expression, short legs, but maybe it has gone on for lifetimes, but ultimately when you see the game and you pull the thread out, you pull out the thread, that the light body thread, then it all unravels. It actually unravels very quickly. So, oh, Laura. Hi. Okay, so just looking at the chat. So Laura's here. So Laura 1970 says, hi, Elaine, much love and gratitude to you. Last time we talked about my diamond body activating. Oh, okay, yeah, good timing. But my physical body is really struggling. Yeah. Is there anything that can bring into more coherence? Okay, so let's take a look. I know this live is a bit long, but we can do this. So let's take a look. So I hope, Sunija, that answered your question. So now, okay, let's take a look at Laura, 1970. So the diamond body is activating. So it can take quite a process because you have to remove everything for the diamond body to be 100%, which is some other teachers call it the light body, but it's the diamond body. So let's take a look at, okay, so they're saying the crystalline, like let's look at the crystalline template first. And then look at the interference in the crystalline template. Okay, so they're saying the crystalline template with the diamond body, it's like the musical score hasn't been the musical score, like like your musical score, like your own being's musical score isn't in sync yet. So it's like, if you're in a choir and then some people's voice is like they have perfect pitch, and then others, they actually need support from the perfect pitch, other choir members, and then, but they do have a good voice, but their voice needs some training. So that's what they're saying right now. They're saying that some parts of the body, like the solar plexus and the sacral, they need like they don't have perfect pitch yet. So they're still acclimatizing. They're still activating. So the solar plexus and the sacral, so where the ribs meet, and then 2 inches below the belly button. Very typical for light workers. So okay, so they're just saying right now there's like a interference on the solar plexus. So that's your power center. So it's yellow. So, okay, so they're just going to look at that. So they're going to remove it. So there's like an interference. How it looks actually is like a cage or like a metal webbing or, and remember, this is energy work. It's not physical, right? So you don't physically have some metal cage. It's energy work. So you have this metal webbing. They're going to call it, because it's more intricate. It's like metal webbing on the solar plexus, which is the power center. So it's basically interfering with the musical score of the crystalline template. So you kind of need both. You need the diamond body, you need the crystalline template. So they're just going to remove that off of the solar plexus, and then we'll see how you feel. So good question, Laura. Good question. So let's take a look. So we're grounding to Gaia. Okay. So what it looks like is what they're doing is like kind of removing it. You know how you would with a tweezer, like kind of piece by piece, if you have kind of like a sliver, but it's like more than one. So they're kind of like removing it piece by piece because it it was created to kind of control the solar plexus, so the power center. So that's usually very typical of the interference for a light worker is usually for sure, because obviously if you're empowered and have power, then yeah, it's like a webbing. They're saying it's like a webbing, like woven, like almost like how when you see a open kind of basket like basket weaving, but it's open webbing, it's not tight. So there's a lot of holes in it. So because it's like, yeah, they're not source, right? So it can seem very high tech, but compared to source, it's very low tech. Like there's a lot of holes. So basically they're just anchoring in the holes, which is where source consciousness is. And then they're just expanding out, because before they were kind of going kind of piece by piece to the metal, but then they're like, that's too slow. So now they're looking at the holes, and then they're bringing in more source consciousness in the holes. But the holes are source consciousness because they can't cover it up completely. So then now they're just opening from the holes that were there in that overlay in their design. Like they're, if you think about it, they're like tinkers, or they're like makers. They're like, they're trying to make stuff. They're trying to make stuff. So they're just like having the divine masculine, the left eye, help with the. So if you just feel a bit nauseous, or just breathe, just breathe. Just breathe. Yeah. Yeah, so they're saying it's a good question, Laura. Like, good. Like, that's good. It's time for this to get removed, basically, because the diamond body was creating like a light, like a pressure. And, because the diamond body, all of it has, it all needs to be removed. Like for the diamond body and the light body to be fully on, and the crystalline body to be fully on and activated, all the interference has to get removed, right? So just checking my microphone. So they're just working on it right now. So it's at the solar plexus. And just breathe. So they're just expanding, so as they're expanding, bringing in more consciousness into that grid that's over the solar plexus, as they're bringing in more light, then it's kind of like stretching it, and then the metal, but it's not metal because energy work, but it looks kind of like metal. It's basically, it evaporates on its own. So as we're bringing in more source consciousness, so activating more of your inner source consciousness, the one consciousness, as we're bringing that in, it's like stretching out. So it's like taking over the solar plexus, but it already, your original design, your solar plexus is source connected. So it's basically removing the interference. And then it's like stretching it. So instead of pulling everything out bit by bit, they're like just stretching it. And then basically it stretches so much, like they're saying it's at 90% now, stretching so much that it just evaporates. It just like turns into nothing, right? So this stuff that's been so created so much interference, so much agitation, but the body has been saying there's something not right. There's something agitating. There's something not right. Right. And then you ask a question, and then we look at, okay, well, what's interfering? Right. And it was an interference because the diamond body and the crystalline body both need to activate together. And then, but all the interference must be removed. So I can't remember if it's for Laura, if it's bees that are important for her, but I just saw two bees out the window that came towards the window. So they really are like helping. They really help. I feel like it was Laura before. The bees are helping. So, and because they bring in a sweetness and a love, a dedication, to the queen bee, the queen mother, the queen bee. You know, they really bring a devotion to the queen bee, the divine feminine. And that's, since that 2000 years ago, when Sophia descended into matter, into 3D material plane, she did it for her devotion to consciousness. and then her devotion was used against her. How do we trap a high vibrational being that's in service to source? How do we trap them into the 3D? So now we're like, okay, the gig's up. So we're removing the interference. So they're just like, okay, it's like almost 98%, which is really good. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Take a deep breath, right? So what a relief, right? As soon as we get through these, releasing these interferences, but we have to name them. We have to actually be the ones where our consciousness, because we're always told there's a savior outside of us, but we have to see for ourselves there's something interfering, there's something wrong, there's something going on, because we have to respect the rules of the 3D, like, because when you're a high vibrational light being, you're here as a light worker, and I hear this, with my clients, is like, well, why do I don't have any respect for the 3D, right? But our bodies are in the 3D realm to help us awaken our consciousness. Right? So we need that respect, right? Respect to respect, source to source, the divine to the divine. So, and then the bees are a really good mirror of that because they are devoted to the Queen Mother, and really Sophia was like our, Queen Mother, she came because she heard the children cry, humanity, the human beings, the light workers on earth. She heard their cries. And then what happens to our bodies also is happening to earth, but then also happens at the higher consciousness level of 5D, and above. So they're like, good, we're at 99. They're always like, we're alchemizing, and we're kind of, they're always back to still point, right? Back to original design, source consciousness, and then back to still point. Grounded in the 3D body, but with our consciousness as light workers, with our consciousness as empaths, like with our big giant hearts, right? So they're like 99.5. So they're just right now, they're like acclimatized. The word that they're saying is we're just acclimatizing. We're acclimatizing basically to help the rest of the body, be like, oh, okay, this is the new, but really this is the original design, right? It seems like it's new because there was like an interference, but we're just letting the body know, but this is actually not new. It is the original. It's not foreign. It actually is the real. So it's like seeing the real from the false. So okay, and then we're back 100%. They're like 100%. 100%. So the solar plexus is free. It's free. You'll feel the power, and especially being able, like the queen bee mother, she has all of the bees and she takes care of them all. It's not a burden. She can take care of thousands, but she has to be the leader. And um she can do it. They're like, and she does it easily, she's made to do it. So okay, so let's take a look at the chat. How did that go? So okay, so Laura's question, so 1970, so hi Elaine, much love and gratitude to you last time, and much love and gratitude to you too, Laura. So my physical body is really struggling. Is there anything that we can bring it to more coherence? Okay, perfect. That's the perfect word. You named it, Laura, like coherence. So what happened is a coherence between the diamond body and the crystalline body, or the crystalline expression. So yeah, like, the music score, kind of like of your body. And then Laura said, yeah, I see that playing out in my life overall. Okay, good. And then Laura said, wonderful. And then, so as we're going through the activation, so they aren't activations, they're activations and kind of like ejections, like we're ejecting out of your system what was not supposed to be there in the first place. And then we're bringing in your true expression, your true blueprint, your true diamond body. And then let's see. And then Laura says, I'm so grateful. Yeah, thanks, Laura. Thank you for saying so. And then she said yes, and then she understands with the bees, and then she agrees. So wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to send you lots of love. And Sinija and Helen as well for like going in the chat. And then everybody that also, hasn't gone in the chat because, they're watching, but some people, they don't want the pressure of like interacting. And I understand that. So send lots of love to everybody. Laura says, thank you so much with a emoji hearts, 3 hearts. So yeah, thank you. And really good question, Laura, because that is what's coming up for a lot of people right now. So it's like the diamond body, the crystalline expression, they all need to work together and then clear interference. So thank you for your question and for reaching out. But I think let's end now. We went far and wide, but it was really important. And we really opened, we really went into openness and we talked about some things that are not easy to talk about, but they are easy to talk about. Like what is hard is the secrets or the pretending, that's what's really hard. But for light workers, the truth is like gold, nothing calms the nervous system for a light worker like the truth, the truth of who you are, like your true expression, your true essence being out in the world. That's what we need. We need we need everyone's true expression, and I hear this in sessions where, they always have reverence, like we're always like, oh, well, this person, they should look like this and they should look like that. But, in the astral, in the higher realms, they're so honored, when we meet each other, it's such an honor, like it's such an honor for us to be here, to have this connection together in YouTube. I mean, it's such an honor. That's technology, we're using technology in Source's name. So yeah, thank you for being here. And we will see you again on Tuesday. And yes, the X relationship decree is out on the 16th of May, 2026. And then I have a nice surprise that's very light, a very nice surprise for the Saturday after that will bring some joy and some happiness, some relief, because you've been working so hard. You've been following all of the decrees. So, and thank you for asking a question. And all your comments. From my heart to yours, I appreciate it so much. Always take what resonates, leave the rest, use your own discernment. That's very important in all of this work. We're not here, we're here to activate our own consciousness, which then helps the collective. All right, lots of love, and we'll